Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. It is signing day, December the 4th. And guys, we're going to do a little signing day primer here for LSU. I think the first thing to note is how much earlier this signing day is than ever before. I mean, even in the few years now, we've had the early signing day in December. This thing, December 4th, means right after the season. I mean, 4 days after the season ends. In fact, if you're in a conference championship game, your season hasn't even ended yet. And yet we've got early signing day. Why the change, and do coaches actually like that, Wilson?
I'm not sure. I haven't actually asked around too much of like if coaches like it or not. I think they see. Everybody thought that the situation with signing day being on basically the third Wednesday of December did not work in the new 12-team college football playoff era. Those first round playoff games are December 20th, 21st, and that was not really going to work. Now it's still like right in the middle of conference championship week for teams that are in those games, which is a tough spot to be in if you're trying to finish out a class. But recruiting has also gotten moved up so much sooner anyway on the calendar. Guys making more decisions and making more official visits in the spring and in the summer, making more decisions before a season actually starts, that it made a lot of sense to move this out of that time of December when the transfer portal is also open and very active. And now the portal window is shorter than it used to be. That'll be open from December 9th through the date is suddenly escaping me. It's the 20-something of December. It's basically open for like 3-ish weeks or 20 days maybe. And now that those things aren't overlapping, that makes life easier on these coaches for sure, because you hear the complaint all the time in the past about how much was going on at once in December. This kind of spreads things out, lets you go ahead and finish this class before the portal opens up on Monday.
I should have started with this. I'm Zach Ewing. That's Wilson Alexander and Koki Riley, a couple of our LSU beat writers. We're talking football signing day. And yeah, Koki, no matter what the reasons, and a lot of what Wilson says makes sense, it's a quick turnaround for these guys. I mean, you basically are recruiting throughout the season anyway, but you've got to close these deals here just within days of your season ending.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned closing the deal, because there's still flips, right? As we saw with Bryce Underwood a couple of weeks ago, and as I'm seeing on my own Twitter feed, where it's like guys flipping from Pittsburgh to Missouri and Texas A&M to USC, or USC to Texas A&M, right? So like there's flips happening all over the place. And you're trying to hold on to your guys. You're trying to flip guys from other schools onto your school. You're trying to bring in a guy like Jahkeem Stewart, who is a 5-star defensive lineman who isn't committed to anybody yet, who just reclassified from 26 to 25. And there's still a lot of activity going on out there, despite the fact that LSU probably has the vast majority of its class fairly well locked up to this point, I'd say. So yeah, it's still a very busy time, given the fact that the season just ended. You're getting ready for the transfer portal. You're trying to convince guys to come back. Like, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah, so we're going to get you ready for signing day. All those faxes and all. They still use fax machines on these things? I guess they have to. They got to have the hard copy.
Well, you don't actually know. Remember, the national letter of intent isn't actually.
That's not a thing anymore.
It's a different kind of agreement. I don't know. The fax machines will be humming like they used to.
But we're going to get you ready for signing day either way on this episode. It is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. We'll be back right after this message, and we're going to start our signing day breakdown for LSU.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars Rewards.
Okay, so our LSU Signing Day Primer. This show is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. Guys, the story has to start. We had the live show a couple weeks ago. LSU loses Bryce Underwood. He's the number one quarterback, number one recruit in the country. Michigan just basically came in and made him a Godfather offer, an offer he couldn't refuse. I mean, not the same meaning as
there wasn't a horse
in the Godfather.
in the head.
There was no horse head, but they gave him so much money that he basically changed his mind and flipped, and that's part of this game now too. But that shouldn't take away from the fact that LSU still has a very good recruiting class. It's still ranked number 6 in the country. They still have some of the nation's top players. I think they have 5 top 50 players. DJ Pickett, the cornerback from Florida, is ranked number 19 in 24/7's composite rankings. Running back Harlem Berry is ranked number 36. Another corner, Cade Phillips, is 37.
Those are just 24/7's own rankings. Actually, the 24/7 Sports composite.
Oh, do I not have the composite? Okay, I'm sorry.
The composite for Harlem Berry is 15th, and he's a consensus 5-star. Cade Phillips is 54th, and then Charles Ross, linebacker, he's 80th in the country in that 24/7 Sports composite. They've got a number of top 100 guys, which is a good change for kind of this recruiting class and where LSU's been recruiting over the last few years. Is like they'd have a few stars here and there, but there's more top 100 recruits in this class than LSU has had. I think it's certainly compared to last year.
And these guys are the star players, and our star player segment is proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. And I don't know. I think there's got to be a lot of LSU fans, Koki, who are looking at this class and going, thank God they're getting some defensive recruits in. We mentioned the corners. Carius Kern, the defensive lineman, is in. I don't know. He's an offensive lineman. I'm sorry. Carius Kern's an offensive lineman. But you do have the linebackers in Charles Ross, Jaden Breaker, and the cornerbacks, Cade Phillips and DJ Pickett. So it's not perfect because a lot of these guys aren't going to come in and start right away or anything, but it does help you build that defense up for the future.
Yeah, especially at corner, which is a position where they just haven't landed a whole bunch of top 100 sort of caliber guys at the position, if any. I mean, JV Toviano is really the only guy that they've gotten in the secondary who's a top 100-ish, at least a potential corner. And then when you bring in a guy like, when you potentially bring in a guy like Pickett and you bring in a guy like Cade Phillips, I mean that's just a nice infusion of top tier talent at that position where you really needed some of those high caliber guys like that.
What kind of player is DJ Pickett? What kind of corner is LSU getting?
He is long, man, 6'4", pretty thin at 6'4", so might need to add a little bit of weight to his frame. But he's got a lot of length out there on the outside. I can't recall seeing a corner that tall. And that's kind of the big thing in terms of his athletic profile, but he can run. He's the kind of guy who could start day one for this team. You talk about 5-star corners over the past few years with like Eli Ricks and Derek Stingley. Pickett is right up there in terms of the ability to come in and make an impact on this team next year. He might have started for LSU this season at cornerback. He is a guy who's going to be right there in the mix as long as he signs. Other teams have been trying to flip DJ Pickett, Miami and in Georgia in particular. But DJ Pickett was on LSU's campus this past weekend as LSU tries to wrap that up. I think they'll probably be sweating it just a little bit until pen hits paper and all that, and then they have that officially locked down and done. Just because, like you said, does somebody come in with a large chunk of change here, and like we saw with Underwood, and make things different? But so far, LSU's been able to hold off those other contenders for him and be able to keep one of the other 5-stars in this class. And that's going to be the most important thing here come Wednesday, because LSU, as Koki said, has not had that top-tier cornerback talent that you're used to seeing at LSU really since the beginning of the Brian Kelly era. There was a lot of they tried to patch it up through the transfer portal. That worked, and then it didn't work. While at the same time, bringing in high school guys, but they weren't bringing in these top high school guys like DJ Pickett and Cade Phillips, guys who can contend right away, and Pickett in particular for playing time.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Stingley came in and played right away. I could certainly see DJ Pickett doing the same thing. Non-DJ Pickett division, since he's clearly, now that Underwood's gone, the top guy in this class. What recruits stick out to you guys? Who are your favorites to maybe? It's very difficult to project this, but a guy who you've got your eye on is saying whether he helps this year, this coming season, or a couple years down the line, your favorites from this class.
Well, Harlem Berry and J.T. Lindsey, the two running backs in this class. LSU, Harlem Berry's a 5-star out of the New Orleans area, a guy with a lot of speed who you would think can come in. And that's the other thing is you talk about guys like when can they play. The running back position, we have seen guys play and play well as a freshman. Just this past year, Caden Durham, as a freshman, had a very nice season. And you're going to lose Josh Williams. We still don't know what's going on with Trey Holly. His legal case is still going on, so he has not been part of the team. And so, Caleb Jackson didn't have the sophomore year that everybody kind of thought he would. But now, you bring in a guy like Harlem Berry and J.T. Lindsey, and you're adding talent to that position. And pieces that can work around Caden Durham. And, you're talking about maybe having 4 or 5 guys in that group where we were concerned about LSU's running back depth at times, over the offseason and into this year. They kind of got through that because, of Josh Williams and Caden Durham's ability to play on with dislocated toes. And now you're going to have a little bit more depth in there and talented depth as well. J.T. Lindsey has been a very productive player this year, both Louisiana guys as well. And Frank Wilson continues to add to that class of just that group of running backs.
Yeah, I think we should at least mention Charles Ross, the linebacker, top 100 recruit, kind of consensus high 4-star guy. This linebacker room is becoming more and more talented by the day. It feels like you add him, you bring in a guy like Zach Weeks. They have Keelan Moses in this class as well.
Jaden Breaker too.
Yeah, Jaden Breaker. They got a pretty loaded linebacker class coming in. They had Devon Keys, who was a true freshman who played a little bit this season. They have the month, weeks and weeks. And then they might even have Harold Perkins come back. So, yes, you're going to lose Greg Penn, and you're going to lose that experience, and that's important, obviously. But you also have West Weeks, who has plenty of experience. You have Whit Weeks, who now has plenty of experience with basically 2 years as a starter. And then you might even have Harold Perkins come back. So it's experience, it's talent, it's depth. There's not a lot you can pick at with the linebacker room, and that's even if they lose a guy or two to the portal. So, you have to feel pretty good about this LSU linebacker room at the moment.
Obviously, nothing, as we mentioned, is official until pen hits paper. You'd obviously rather have the guys committed and just trying to hold on to them than trying to flip them. But besides DJ Pickett, anybody that you're worried about flipping that LSU should be worried about flipping? Derek Meadows is obviously the name that comes to mind for me. Yeah,
there was a lot of buzz about Meadows flipping to potentially to Michigan after Bryce Underwood signed. There's some chatter with Alabama as well. For now, he is still in LSU's class. And this is a guy who is a 4-star receiver. He is 119th nationally on the 24/7 composite rankings, which again, the composite rankings sort of take into account all the major recruiting services. 6'5", 200-pound target. It's probably going to come down to, I think money's going to be a factor there. How much is LSU willing to pay him? How much is he asking for? What does he kind of want out of the offense and those sorts of things to see if he ends up sticking with this commitment or not? I know those conversations were still going with Derek Meadows. I don't think LSU has not cut off communication with him by any means, and just sort of it's not resigned to the fact that he's going to go elsewhere. But that seems to be where things have been trending, especially since the Bryce Underwood flip, and we'll see if that one. What happens with that one? The other one, I think, this is according to Shea Dixon at the Bengal Tiger, the LSU's On 3 site. Mike Tyler, tight end. He's from right outside of Columbia. He's in Columbia, South Carolina, and 3-star tight end. And South Carolina's been making a push for him, and we'll see if he elects to stay home or end up sticking with his commitment on signing day. Yeah, and the thing with Meadows that makes it pretty notable is that LSU doesn't have the
deepest and strongest wide receiver class that they've had since Cortez Hankton started taking over that position. So being able to or not being able to hold on to Meadows is kind of a big deal when it comes to that. Last year their wide receiver class was pretty deep, so it's not like the end of the world for the position. But this is wide receiver U. I mean, they've been churning out these guys, these potential first round picks at wide receiver for years now, and I think Meadows is sort of pegged as the top guy in terms of developing the next set of great receivers. I mean, they also Teron Francis committed as well. He's a local kid. Right. Yeah. So and Philip Wright. So they have it's not like he's the only receiver committed, but he's the biggest fish. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out for.
Of course, Flipsmas season goes both ways. Anybody you think LSU could be targeting to flip to their list in these next couple of days?
#Flipmas. Yeah.
Yeah. Merry Flipmas.
My inner Hayes Fawcett. Our inner Hayes Fawcett.
Yeah.
So.
Well, who do you have on Flipmas watch then?
On the for LSU bringing in somebody. I mean, Solomon Thomas is probably the only name that really pops out, especially since he's a 5-star recruit. He's committed to Florida State. As everyone sort of knows, I mean, Alex Atkins, their offensive coordinator the last few years, who was also their offensive line coach. Thomas is an offensive lineman. They fired him midway through the season, so I assume that was his like top connection with Florida State, and Thomas was at the Vanderbilt game a couple weeks ago, so it'll be interesting to see what he does. Right now he's committed to Florida State still, but in terms of #Flipmas, that's a guy to sort of keep an eye out for, especially since Jahkeem Stewart isn't committed to anybody, so he's still a free bird out there.
Those who can't see or you're listening on the audio podcast, Koki is actually making a hashtag with his fingers in his lap as he says that.
It's like the Justin Timberlake and Jimmy Fallon sketch from like 10 years ago.
Yeah, we got some sign language going on. Anybody else to add to that, Wilson, who LSU could be adding? I mean, a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes too.
No one who I know of as potential flip here coming toward the end. But like you said, in terms of the addition, the big one that everybody will be watching for on signing day is Jahkeem Stewart.
Well, that's a heck of a place to transition, and this is going to be our recruiting segment. It is sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. Okay, so for those who don't know, the saga of Jahkeem Stewart here, he reclassified from the 2026 class to the 2025 class. He moved from he transferred from St. Aug to Edna Karr, but he has not played at Edna Karr. The way I understand it is he was allowed to take some classes at Edna Karr that allowed him to reclassify and get done with his high school credits and everything so that he could be class of 2025. That, of course, makes recruiting very complicated. Jahkeem Stewart is a man-child. He is a huge physical specimen. He could come in on the defensive line. Don't know, it's a hard position to make an immediate impact, and making it even harder is the fact that he's only played like 10 high school varsity games. But it's no surprise that teams want him. Frank Wilson's recruiting him for LSU. Some people will tell you Frank Wilson was instrumental in getting him to Edna Karr and getting him to reclassify, so LSU is clearly involved here. But a lot of smoke in the last few days seems to be leading Jahkeem Stewart to USC all the way out in LA. So I don't know what to make of this one, Wilson. Do you?
No, I really don't. I mean, yeah, like you said, it's rare to see a guy, or I don't know if rare is necessarily the right word. Well, I think maybe it does apply here. Like Zach Weeks reclassified, and it wasn't like he like shot up the ring. He's like Jahkeem Stewart reclassified. He's still a 5-star who's the 16th player in the country according to those composite rankings. Like even after reclassifying, like you said, not playing, only having played like 10 high school varsity games, and so it speaks to the athleticism, the way that he projects as a player, especially at a position that is hard to find. Really elite players, you got to hit on them. So anyway, I don't know where this is going to go at this end of things. NIL in this case is tough. I think teams are going to have to make a decision on a guy who hasn't played that much, you're projecting a lot in terms of what you've seen out of him in camps. Like how much do you want to allocate toward him? You have to really trust your evaluation. he's a coveted prospect, so he's going to be able to demand some money here. And teams are going to, like USC and LSU and such, are going to have to decide just how much they're willing to offer him. And I think that'll probably end up being a factor in his final decision. The other thing is just in terms of what's happened lately, according to Shea, again, was on LSU's campus last week on Wednesday. He did not end up taking a visit again for the Oklahoma game. There was some rumors of that. He ended up staying home. So, we got a couple days here. Dead period kicks in right before signing day. He was on LSU's campus recently, which gives them some optimism. But I don't know that anybody knows with certainty at the moment what he's going to do come Wednesday.
Yeah, him coming to campus on Wednesday means that LSU is still in this thing. But it doesn't mean at all that they're the favorite or they should get him or anything like that. So in terms of like intrigue heading into Wednesday, that's probably the thing we'll keep out the most. Keep an eye out for the most.
We'll be watching Jahkeem Stewart. He's 6'6", 270. I mean, we don't know whether he could be an impact player at all, much less an immediate impact player, but he's the kind of athlete you want to get in your
And he's a Louisiana guy. That's right. You want to continue to put up that fence around the state. You want this, you don't want to make recruiting decisions fully based on optics. Because especially a guy like that who's a 5-star and you're going to have to pay some money to an NIL deal, you don't want to. You need to just trust your evaluation, whatever that is, and how much money you're willing to go to based on that evaluation. But it would be huge for kind of the optics, the public perception of this recruiting class after losing Bryce Underwood to go ahead and finish off with him. Because then even if you do lose a Derek Meadows, if you do lose a Mike Tyler, if you're able to sign Stewart or maybe even flip Thomas, then you still end up with a lot of 5-stars. You're improving the totality of your roster in the wake of losing the number one player in the country. And that would be a fantastic, strong way to finish this recruiting class that has had a lot of hype around it and has given the LSU fan base a lot of reason to feel optimistic moving forward. Even after an 8-4 season, it was well, they still have got the 2025 recruiting class. You lost the biggest piece of that, but if you can close strong, then you still have some reasons to have positivity and optimism going into the offseason as to where this program is moving forward. And the other thing about Stewart that would really help is on the defensive line here. LSU's already got 4 defensive linemen committed. Bo Davis has been able to grab 4 guys for this class, but none of them are the prospect like Stewart is. Guys who are going to maybe be, I think that Davis has probably found some guys that he really likes and can develop. But nobody who is ranked as high as Stewart. And so that doesn't always mean everything in terms of how a guy's going to turn out. But that is, you would end up having 5 defensive linemen in this class if you're able to get him. And that's a position that LSU needs to build. And that would be a good step in the right direction.
It's also a position where you need depth. I mean, you rotate those guys in and out all the time. There's obviously injuries. So it would be a coup. If you're looking for a new opportunity, Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Wilson mentioned the big picture. We're going to talk a little more big picture and where LSU's recruiting class kind of fits in scope of the nation and the SEC. We will do that right after this break on the LSU Sports Insider.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love, you gave me love.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit ClassicIndustrial.com for more information.
going through our signing day primer here on the LSU Sports Insider. Make sure you are subscribed to the LSU Sports on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Tell your friends about us. Share the videos. Hit the like button. All of that good stuff. If you're listening audio style, you can always leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Comment on where you think Jahkeem Stewart's going and what you think of that whole situation, because it's as far as signing day stories, it's up there as far as intrigue. There's a lot going on there. And Jeff Duncan, our columnist down in New Orleans, doing a column on Jahkeem Stewart. He's talked to some of the people around him and kind of found out what he can find out too about how that all went down. We're going to do today's Around the SEC segment. Is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. And guys, that is LSU's class is ranked number 6 in the country, which, as you said before the break, Wilson, is, hey, there's a lot of reason for hope. Even without Bryce Underwood, there are a lot of good players coming in, and they got to keep a hold on Pickett and Meadows and some of these other guys to keep that ranking. And we'll see if they can flip a Solomon Thomas and even improve that ranking. But as it stands right now, in 24/7 Sports composite rankings, LSU has the number 6 recruiting class in the country. That's fantastic. The problem is, it's only the number 5 class in the SEC. 5 of the top 6 are SEC teams.
It's so hard to recruit in the SEC. Georgia, Bama, Texas, Auburn, all ahead of LSU in the 24/7 Sports rankings going into signing day. LSU was in contention for a top 5 class, maybe even definitely top 5 class.
Maybe top 3.
That's what I was wondering if I should say, if it could get to top 3 status. After Underwood, that obviously will not happen, but you could still finish strong here. And like you said, if they're able to flip Thomas or and sign Stewart, then you end up with like 4 consensus 5-star recruits, which puts you up there ahead of Auburn, which only has 1, ahead of Ohio State, which has 3. You'd end up being right up there at the top of the country in terms of the number of 5-stars in your class, and that's what LSU has needed to do. They haven't signed a ton of 5-stars so far during Brian Kelly's tenure. They had Dominic McKinley last year, but they needed to have a star-studded class like this, and they're close. As we record this, about 48 hours out, so they got to finish it.
Yeah, we should have mentioned that up top. We're recording this Monday, so if there's a major breaking Flipsmas season on Tuesday or something, that's why we haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah, we didn't just sleep here all night and then record the next day with the same clothes on Tuesday. So
from Monday's episode.
Yeah. But yeah, like I am kind of curious though, Wilson. Like, would you say that these last few Kelly recruiting classes are pretty similar to, in terms of like quality and the amount of 5-stars they have, to the Ed Orgeron classes or even the Les Miles classes? Because I would say they're fairly similar if you're just looking at them in terms of rankings and all that sort of stuff. These are top 10 classes. These are borderline top 5 classes. There's 2 or 3 5-stars and a whole bunch of 4-stars. And this year's class is maybe a tad better than the last few that they've had under Brian Kelly. Would have been potentially a lot better if Bryce Underwood had sort of stuck around. But I am sort of curious to hear your thoughts on just the way they recruited in comparison to the previous regimes, especially if they're able to hold on to some of these other top guys.
Over the past, Kelly's first 2 full cycles, we're going to throw out the 2022 class because that was in the middle of the coaching transition, and that's not.
They got Perkins though.
Yeah, they closed on Perkins. So his first full class, they signed 2 5-stars, and then last year they signed 1. You go back to Ed Orgeron's, which one is it? Let me see here. They recruited at a very high level under Ed because that was his thing. He was like the recruiting guy. They had the number 3 class in the country in 2021. Back in, I think it was the 2019 class, they were number 5. 2020 class, they were number 4. They recruited at a very high level under Ed Orgeron. They were bringing in multiple 5-stars a year. The problem was sometimes those guys did not pan out.
Yeah, it's a different conversation, but yeah.
Or they had injuries. LSU's had some bad luck with 5-star recruits over the past really decade or so, with a lot of guys who get injured at some point in their career or transfer out or have some other kind of issue. And so their recruiting class rankings were really good. It wasn't always translating to success 2 and 3 years later. And that's what LSU needs to do now with this class. Because that's the other thing you asked about Brian Kelly's first 2 classes. It's like, all right, that 2023 class needs to basically form the backbone of your team next year. That's when they'll all be juniors. And you look back at that class, and let me pull it up real quick. You got Lance Hurd was your top guy. He transferred out. Deshaun Womack was your number 2 guy. He has become a rotational player, but he has not turned into a star that you would expect out of a 5-star player.
Not yet, at least. Yeah.
DJ Chester is a starter. Okay. Javion Toviano is not a rotational player on this team yet. Did not play very much this year. Jaylen Brown transferred out. Whit Weeks at the moment from that class, who was your 6th highest rated player in that class. He is the one who's made the biggest impact. And there's a lot of guys in that class who have not turned into starters yet, who you're going to need to turn into starters or at least key players next year in particular. You could talk about a guy like Caleb Jackson, Shelton Sampson, Kamorian Pimpton, who finally flashed in the Oklahoma game, but, didn't play very much this year as a sophomore. Those sorts of players, Tyree Adams is another one who may need to be a starter next year on the offensive line. You need them to start to play better, because you asked about how Kelly's recruiting has been. That class, when I look at it in particular, like, it has not translated as much as it needs to for you to be a top SEC team.
Yeah, and it's important to also, like, LSU's evaluations are going to be different from Alabama's evaluations, are going to be different from Georgia's and Auburn's, and they're all going to be a little bit different from what the people at 24/7 Sports or Rivals or On 3. That doesn't mean that these people don't know what they're talking about, but everyone's going to look at it a little bit differently, and ultimately how you evaluate those players, and then also throw in injury luck and those sorts of things. You got to have these guys stay healthy. And you got to keep them on campus in the era of the transfer portal too. So this is just the beginning of this conversation for the class of 2025. But over time, taken writ large, recruiting rankings do basically tell you who the top teams in the country are going to be a few years down the road. That's just how it works. Each individual player is not necessarily going to finish where he was slated to, but if you look at the whole classes, and that's why I look at, we talk about the SEC and the Big Ten getting all the playoff teams, guys. Well, you Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Auburn, LSU, all in the top 6. The other one's Ohio State. Then you go Oregon, Michigan, Tennessee, Texas A&M. That's the entire top 10. That's either SEC or Big Ten.
And we're talking about recruiting rankings, just so people are clear.
Recruiting rankings from 24/7 Sports Composite. Miami's number 11. There's one ACC team, okay? Then we have Florida at 12, Notre Dame at 13. They're an independent. Then you have Oklahoma, Ole Miss, 14 and 15, 2 more SEC teams. USC at 16. Georgia Tech randomly, shout out to Georgia Tech, pops up at number 17, an ACC team. But then you go Penn State, Big Ten, Missouri, SEC, Wisconsin, and Washington, Big Ten. That's, 21 teams, only 3 of them are not SEC or Big Ten. So it is, you have to win not just in recruiting, but in your evaluations.
You do, because like you said, there are guys who are ranked 5 stars who don't end up actually becoming super talented players. You got to hit on sometimes 3 and 4 star guys who are going to develop into stars. That you have to be able to find those sort of diamonds in the rough sometimes, and you usually find a lot of them in Louisiana. And so LSU's got to continue to do what it has the last few years in terms of recruiting a lot of the talent in this state. Stars don't matter necessarily to the same. They don't, I think, determine the outcomes the same way they did in the pre-transfer portal era, because there's so much movement. You could sign a 5-star and then lose them the next year.
That's right.
But you do have to be able to sometimes find 3 and 4 star guys who your evaluation is really good and they turn into better players than they are thought to be coming out of high school. But stars, I think, still have a place in college football, still matter. They just don't, I think, they aren't the end-all be-all that they used to be, because that used to determine everything. Alabama and Georgia, just recruiting like crazy. And they were always at the top. The depth on your team isn't what it used to be. But the recruiting still makes the difference. And especially for this LSU team that wants to build through the high school rankings and then supplement through the transfer portal as necessary, you got to be able to continue to build up through that avenue, because that's what's going to determine your long-term success.
Well, it's like the national championship game the last 2 years. It was Georgia against TCU. TCU is not a team that we talk about in these recruiting rankings as a perennial top 20 team, right, in the rankings. And then last year it was Michigan against Washington, and neither of those teams had netted a top 10 class, or really, I don't think any of them really came that close to netting a top 10 class the last 4 years heading into that national championship game. And yet that was the national championship game, which kind of, I think all that sort of tells you that, recruiting still matters, at least to some degree. But the portal and NIL and all that stuff matters at least as much now. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this sort of all shakes out in a 12-team playoff, because that might change the way we look at all this too. But if we get to the end of the road of the 12-team playoff and one of those teams is not any of the teams that we've just been talking about, which there's a chance that happens. Like what if SMU gets there, for example, even though they might get more involved in this stuff as
SMU versus Indiana for the championship game.
Yeah,
I'm here for it.
It would be fun, but it would also like kind of spit in the face of all this recruiting stuff we're talking about. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to sort of talk about. And I'm not saying that like recruiting doesn't matter when I bring that up. I'm just saying that like it's going to be a storyline, and then over the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to see how much does recruiting actually still matter when it comes to building really successful teams. Does the portal matter more? Is the portal just free agency, like the way free agency works in the NFL or the NBA? So like it's in terms of importance, that's all I mean. So it's just going to be very interesting to see how it all sort of shakes out.
It's going to be an ongoing thing. We'll be with you every step of the way on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States with steam and electric tracing systems, thermal insulation services, industrial and commercial coatings, refractory services, and general maintenance services. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your smaller quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business, they're a proud community partner supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. We may come back to do a reaction show if there's a signing day surprise, but for right now, this is probably our last show before the SEC Championship game is played on Saturday, so we can't get away without getting some picks from you guys. And that'll be today's sports betting segment, brought to you by the Queen of Baton Rouge. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. It's Texas against Georgia. Interesting. Georgia's biggest win of the year, going to Austin, winning at Texas, giving the Longhorns their only loss. But in the rematch here in Atlanta, which is, of course, in the Bulldogs' backyard, Texas is favored by 2.5 points, just like they were in the first meeting. So, Koki, you got a pick for us? You taking the Longhorns or the Bulldogs here?
It's hard to take the Longhorns after what we saw happen at Texas, and I don't know if enough has happened or changed to suggest that this result would be fundamentally different if the teams play now, right? Like Wilson mentioned in our last show how Miami kind of destroyed Florida, despite the fact that Miami's an ACC team and Florida's an SEC team. But like the way Florida's improved since then, I think the game would be fundamentally different now, and you could maybe expect a different, or at least a closer game, if not a completely different result. And I just don't think enough has changed for, if anything, like Georgia's. Yes, like you could definitely argue that Georgia's gotten quote unquote worse since then, right? Like you look at the really close Georgia Tech game. You look at some of the other.
They also throttled Tennessee.
Yeah, they also throttled Tennessee. So it's been a little bit up and down for Georgia in general. But for Texas, like yes, they lose that game, but it's not like they've dominated everybody else since then, right? It's like a 10-point win against A&M, 10-point win on the road against Arkansas. Not the most convincing victory against Kentucky, even though they won fairly comfortably. So, like, Texas hasn't been dominating the way you'd like them to dominate these individual games, even if they're winning all of them, to make up for what we saw in Austin, 2 months ago.
We got one pick for Georgia. Luke,
one pick for Georgia.
Yeah,
Georgia.
I think I'll go Georgia.
Wilson?
Yeah.
Taking Texas. Here, a big part of it is how hard it is to beat a team twice. Texas is going to be able to, I think, have more success offensively than they did the first time against Georgia. I mean, Georgia's defense played its best game of the year against Texas the first time. It's hard to replicate that. And we've seen this Georgia team be, as Koki mentioned, wildly inconsistent at times this year, where it's moments where it's like, okay, are they going to take a step forward and build on this and become more of a dominant version of themselves? And then they go to 8 overtimes against Georgia Tech at home, and we're trailing by 2 touchdowns late in the fourth quarter. So this Georgia team, it's hard to it's faced tougher tests than Texas has, but it's been so inconsistent in those that when these teams now play each other a second time, I think Texas will be more ready for that. Even though it is in Atlanta, still a neutral site game, you'll have more Texas fans. It doesn't really make a difference from the first time because I was on the road for Georgia, but it's not going to be like they're just going to Athens. And so I think that Texas will win.
I'm going to break the tie here and say Texas wins as well. I think it's a low-scoring game. You know, the reason I think it'll be different from that first meeting, Koki, that was a wild game. It had 7 turnovers in it. 4 of them were by Texas. When that happens, you can get some wildly skewed results. And so I think if we have a little bit more of a normal game, I think Texas is a slightly better team, and you can expect.
But the one thing
wouldn't surprise me.
But the one thing I will say is that Georgia dominated the line of scrimmage in that game, especially on defense. Like, they dominated, and like, it's just hard to say that like that will flip, because that's kind of what you're gonna have to lean on that if you're gonna say that maybe not totally flip, but you're gonna say at least it's even, and that's just a lot to sort of bank on, at least for me, especially since Georgia, this is going to be a practical home. I know it's in Atlanta, so it's a practical home game for Georgia. So
you'll get a lot of Texas fans traveling, first time playing in an SEC championship.
And Georgia fans are like, oh, we going to the SEC championship again? Okay, well, I'm busy that weekend. Like it just doesn't feel like it's going to be
there'll
as
be a lot
big
of Georgia fans there because it's easier to get to from within the state.
Right, I'm not saying, I don't know that it'll be 90-10 or anything like you might
I think it'll be pretty close to 50-50. My X factor is Carson Beck, though, in this game. Carson Beck, you mentioned all the turnovers in that first Texas-Georgia game. He had 3 interceptions. That was when he was just mired in that stretch of games where he was turning the ball over constantly. And now you look at the last 3 games, Carson Beck now has, against Tennessee, UMass, and Georgia Tech, 11 touchdowns, and the key, no interceptions. He was not great early on in that Georgia Tech game, and then heated up late. If he's able to be the best version of himself, kind of play the way he did against Tennessee, then that could help win Georgia the game. If he's struggling with turnovers once again, though, like he did the first time against Texas, then Texas is going to have a good chance to win that game.
All right, so that's Saturday afternoon. Those are our SEC championship picks. Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. They've got big screens, they've got live betting, they've got cold brews, they've got cocktails, they've got everything you want. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. Hopefully we elevated your signing day experience today with our show. Get you primed for what LSU can expect tomorrow on signing day. And then, of course, that's just the first step in a busy offseason. So we'll be back next week with more LSU Sports Insider episodes. For our producer, Amelia Cotton, he's Koki Riley and Wilson Alexander. I'm Zach Ewing, and we will see you next time.